I asked when the wedding was. My daughter-in-law looked up from her champagne glass, smiled like she was discussing the weather and said, "Oh, we got married yesterday." For a second I honestly thought I had misheard her. "Yesterday?" I repeated. She nodded. "Yeah. It was a small ceremony." Small ceremony. Those two words landed harder than they should have. Because my son was sitting right beside her. And he couldn't even look me in the eye. The restaurant suddenly felt too loud. Forks scraping plates. People laughing. Music floating from somewhere in the background. Yet all I could hear was my own heartbeat. Yesterday. My only son had gotten married yesterday. And nobody told me. Not a phone call. Not a text message. Not even a lie. Just silence. The kind of silence that tells you you've already been erased. I looked at Marcus. My son. The little boy I raised by myself. The boy whose nightmares I stayed awake through. The boy whose college tuition I paid by working double shifts for years. The boy who once cried because he thought moving away for college meant we'd never see each other again. That boy couldn't even look at me now. Marcus. His shoulders tightened. "It happened kind of fast, Mom. Kind of fast." I almost laughed. People don't accidentally plan weddings. They don't accidentally get marriage licenses. They don't accidentally invite guests. No, they make choices. And every choice had led to this moment. A wedding I wasn't invited to. A marriage I wasn't supposed to know about. And somehow that wasn't even the worst part. Because the expression on my daughter-in-law's face told me something much uglier. She wasn't sorry. Not even a little. In fact. She looked pleased. As if she had been waiting for this conversation. Waiting to watch it happen. Waiting to see how much it hurt. And that realization settled in my chest like ice. Because suddenly this didn't feel like an oversight. It felt intentional. Very intentional. I smiled. Not because I felt calm. But because I had learned a long time ago that some people become crueler when they see your pain. And I wasn't about to feed anyone. Especially her. "Congratulations," I said softly. Her eyebrows lifted. Almost like she had expected a scene. Almost like she was disappointed she wasn't getting one. "Thank you," she said. Then she took another sip of champagne. And that was when I knew. This wasn't the beginning. This was the result of something that had been building for a very long time. Something I had ignored. Something I had excused. Something I had hoped would get better. I was wrong. Very wrong. Because if there's one thing I've learned about disrespect, it's this. When people think you'll tolerate it, they don't stop. They escalate. And looking back now, the signs had been there from the beginning. Every single one of them. The first time I met Vanessa, she hugged me and insulted me in the same sentence. At the time, it was so subtle I almost missed it. Almost. Marcus had invited me to dinner after 6 months of dating her. He sounded excited. Nervous too. The kind of nervous a man gets when he's hoping the two most important women in his life will like each other. I wanted that for him. God knows I wanted that. When I arrived, Vanessa stood and smiled. She was beautiful. Elegant. Perfect hair. Perfect makeup. Perfect smile. The kind of woman who looked expensive even when she wasn't trying. She hugged me warmly. Then she leaned back and said, "Marcus told me you're a nurse. That's so admirable." I smiled. "Thank you." She nodded. Not many people are willing to do jobs like that. Jobs like that. Something about the way she said it felt strange. But I let it go. Then she added, "My parents always pushed us toward executive careers." There it was. Small enough to deny. Sharp enough to cut. I noticed Marcus shifting in his seat. He noticed it too. But nobody said anything. And that became a pattern. Vanessa specialized in comments that looked harmless from the outside. Comments that gave her plausible deniability. Comments that left you wondering whether you were imagining things. At family dinner she would say things like, "Some people care more about stability than ambition." Or, "I guess everyone has different standards of success." Or my personal favorite, "Money isn't everything. Some people are perfectly happy living simple lives." Always smiling. Always polite. Always looking directly at me. And every time it happened, Marcus would go quiet. Not agreeing. Not defending. Just quiet. That silence started hurting more than her words. Because silence has a way of choosing sides. especially when it happens over and over again. Still, I kept trying. For Marcus. Always for Marcus. I invited them for holidays, bought thoughtful gifts, remembered birthdays, asked about their careers, supported their goals. I treated Vanessa like family long before she earned it, and for a while I convinced myself things were improving. Then came the lake house incident. The moment everything shifted. Vanessa's parents owned a massive property outside the city, the kind of place people post online to prove they're successful. Marble floors, private dock, guest cottages, everything designed to impress. Marcus invited me for a weekend gathering. I almost didn't go. Something in my gut told me not to, but Marcus sounded hopeful. So I went. The first evening seemed pleasant enough. Until dinner. 20 people sat around a long table. Business owners, executives, investors, people who introduced themselves by mentioning net worth before personality. Halfway through the meal, Vanessa's father raised his wine glass. "Let's go around the table." Everyone smiled. He continued, "Tell us what you do." Simple enough. Until it reached me. "I'm a registered nurse." Silence. Tiny. Barely noticeable. But it was there. Then Vanessa's mother smiled. "Oh." Just one word. "Oh." The kind of "oh" that somehow contains an entire judgment. I felt it immediately. Several people exchanged glances. Someone changed the subject. And the conversation moved on. But not before I saw Vanessa watching me, studying my reaction, measuring it, like she enjoyed seeing where I ranked in their social hierarchy. That night I sat alone on the dock, watching the water, wondering why I felt so small. Because logically I knew I shouldn't. I had built a good life, raised a good son, owned my home, saved my money, helped countless people. I had nothing to be ashamed of. Yet somehow those people had managed to make me feel like I didn't belong. And that realization stayed with me. Because people who worship status have a unique talent. They make dignity feel invisible, unless it's attached to money. The next morning proved I wasn't imagining any of it. Breakfast had barely started when Vanessa's mother asked me a question. A very specific question. "So how long do you think you'll keep working?" I looked up. "I'm not planning to retire yet." She smiled. "Oh." Again. That word. That awful little word. Then she added, "I just assumed you'd want to enjoy life eventually." The table went quiet. Because everyone understood what she really meant. Working people. Ordinary people. People like me. We're supposed to admire people like them. Not stand beside them. And certainly not become family. Marcus stared at his plate. I waited. I waited for him to say something. Anything. A joke. A correction. A defense. Nothing came. That silence followed me home. And for the first time I wondered whether I was losing my son. Not to marriage. Not to adulthood. But to something else. Something darker. The need for approval. The need to belong. The need to be accepted by people who only respected status. Over the next 2 years things got worse. Much worse. Invitations became selective. Information became limited. Family events happened without me knowing. Vacations appeared on social media after they returned. Important decisions were announced after they had already been made. Every exclusion came wrapped in an excuse. Every excuse sounded reasonable. And that's what made it so dangerous. Because disrespect is easiest to hide when it's dressed as practicality. One Christmas I arrived with gifts. Vanessa opened hers, smiled politely, then placed it aside without even looking at it. 5 minutes later, her mother's gift received 10 minutes of attention. Photos, compliments, excitement. I said nothing, but I noticed. People think quiet women don't notice things. They're usually wrong. We notice everything. We just don't announce it. Another year passed. Then another. And slowly I became a guest in my own son's life. Never fully included. Never openly rejected. Just kept at arm's length. Close enough to avoid criticism. Far enough to avoid connection. The most painful part? Marcus saw it. I know he did. Sometimes I caught guilt in his eyes. A flash of awareness. A moment where he recognized what was happening. But guilt without action changes nothing. Absolutely nothing. Then 6 months before the wedding that I didn't know was a wedding, something happened that should have opened my eyes completely. Vanessa hosted an engagement dinner. At least that's what she called it. Only later would I realize it wasn't really an engagement dinner. It was something else. A rehearsal. A test. A preview of exactly where she intended to place me. And where she believed I belonged. At the very bottom. That night, surrounded by expensive smiles and expensive opinions, Vanessa stood to make a toast. Everyone lifted their glasses. She smiled at Marcus. Then she said something I would never forget. Something that sounded sweet enough to fool almost everyone in the room. Almost. She said, "I'm grateful for the people who helped shape Marcus into the man he became." People applauded. Then she continued, "And I'm especially grateful for the people helping him become the man he's meant to be." The room erupted again. But I felt something cold slide down my spine. Because her eyes had found mine. And in that moment I understood exactly what she meant. She wasn't thanking me. She was replacing me. Publicly. Politely. Deliberately. And somehow, nobody else seemed to notice. Or maybe they did. Maybe they simply didn't care. I remember driving home that night with tears burning behind my eyes. Not because of what she said, but because Marcus never corrected it. Never challenged it. Never even looked uncomfortable. As if losing me was simply part of becoming who he wanted to be. And now, sitting across from them in that restaurant, hearing that they had gotten married yesterday without telling me, all those moments came rushing back. Every comment. Every slight. Every silence. Every excuse. Every warning sign. Suddenly they formed one ugly picture. A picture I had been refusing to see. Vanessa smiled and reached for Marcus's hand. Her wedding ring sparkled beneath the restaurant lights. A ring I was seeing for the first time. A marriage I wasn't invited to. A family milestone I learned about 24 hours too late. Then she looked directly at me and asked a question. A question that changed everything. "You're not upset, are you?" The table went silent. Marcus froze. And something about the way she asked it told me she already knew the answer. She wasn't seeking reassurance. She was testing boundaries. Testing power. Testing whether I would finally react. Whether I would finally break. Whether I would give her the scene she'd been building toward for years. I looked at her. Then at Marcus. And for the first time, I stopped feeling hurt. What I felt instead was something much more dangerous. Clarity. Because there was one thing Vanessa didn't know. One thing neither of them knew. They thought they understood exactly who I was. An ordinary nurse. A quiet mother. A woman desperate to stay connected to her son. A woman with no leverage. No influence. No power. And that assumption was about to become the biggest mistake of their lives. But I wasn't going to correct them. Not yet. Because sometimes the truth is most powerful when people walk straight into it themselves. And they were already walking. They just didn't realize how close they were to the edge. For a few seconds nobody spoke. Vanessa's question hung over the table like smoke. "You're not upset, are you?" The strange thing was, I wasn't. Not in the way she expected. The hurt was still there. Of course it was. You don't spend 32 years loving someone and suddenly stop feeling pain. But underneath that pain was something else. Something calmer. Something colder. The kind of clarity that arrives when denial finally dies. I smiled. A real smile. And that seemed to confuse her. Why would I be upset? I asked. Vanessa blinked. Marcus looked relieved. Too relieved. The kind of relief people feel when they think they've escaped consequences. For now. We just didn't want anything complicated, Marcus said. There it was. The prepared explanation. The excuse they had rehearsed. I nodded slowly. Of course. Vanessa immediately relaxed. Big mistake. Because when manipulative people think they've won, they stop being careful. And that's when they reveal themselves. The rest of dinner felt oddly peaceful. At least on the surface. Vanessa talked about honeymoon plans. Marcus talked about work. Everyone pretended nothing unusual had happened. But I watched. And listened. The same way I had been listening for years. The difference was, I was no longer trying to earn my place. I was observing theirs. And what I saw was fascinating. For years I had assumed Vanessa disliked me because I wasn't wealthy enough. That wasn't entirely true. The reality was uglier. She didn't dislike me because of what I had. She disliked me because of what I represented. Dignity without her approval. Peace without her permission. Self-respect that couldn't be purchased. People like Vanessa understood power. But they only understood one kind. Money, status, influence, appearances. The moment they encounter someone who doesn't worship those things, they become uncomfortable, because suddenly their entire system stops working. And that's exactly what had always bothered her. I finished dinner, paid for my own meal, stood up, and hugged Marcus goodbye. His embrace lingered, longer than usual. For a moment I felt the little boy he used to be. The boy who once ran into my arms after every disappointment. The boy who trusted me. The boy who hadn't yet learned to confuse acceptance with love. Then he stepped back, and the moment disappeared. "I'll call you later, Mom." I nodded. "Take care of yourself." Vanessa smiled. I smiled back. Then I walked away. No argument. No tears. No confrontation. And somehow that seemed to disturb her far more than anger ever could. Because she kept watching me as I left. Watching. Trying to understand. Trying to figure out why I wasn't breaking. The phone rang 3 days later. It was my friend Denise. We've known each other since nursing school. 30 years. Long enough to tell when something is wrong without asking. "You sound different," she said immediately. I laughed. "Do I?" "Yes." Pause. "What happened?" I told her. Everything. The wedding. The secret. The dinner. The years of exclusion. The endless little cuts. When I finished speaking, silence filled the line. Then Denise said something interesting. She didn't sound surprised. She sounded annoyed. "You finally see it." I frowned. "What?" "The pattern." I sat down slowly. "What pattern?" "The one everybody else noticed years ago." That got my attention. "Everybody." Denise sighed. "Grace, people have been talking about this for years." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. "What are you talking about?" "The way they treat you." I said nothing. Denise continued. "Nobody understood why you tolerated it." That hurt more than I expected. Because suddenly I wondered how many people had witnessed my humiliation. How many people had seen it clearly while I kept making excuses. How many times had I defended people who didn't deserve defending? Far too many. Denise lowered her voice. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "If Marcus wasn't your son, would you allow anyone else to treat you this way?" The answer came instantly. "No." "Then why was he the exception?" I had no answer. None. Because sometimes love becomes an excuse. Sometimes loyalty becomes a prison. Sometimes family becomes the reason we accept things we'd never accept from strangers. That conversation stayed with me. For days. Then weeks. And the more I reflected, the more uncomfortable I became. Not because of Vanessa. I already understood Vanessa. What bothered me was Marcus. Because villains are predictable. People who love you aren't supposed to be. A month passed. Then something unexpected happened. Marcus called. Actually called. Not a text. Not an update. A call. "Can we have lunch?" I almost said no. Not out of anger. Out of self-preservation. But curiosity won. So we met. The moment he sat down, I knew something was wrong. His smile looked forced. His eyes looked tired. And for the first time in years. He looked older. Much older. We ordered. Made small talk. Avoided the obvious. Finally he sighed. "Mom." There it was. I waited. He rubbed his forehead. "Things have been stressful." I almost laughed. Stressful. The universal word people use when they don't want to tell the truth. What kind of stress? He hesitated. Long enough to answer the question without speaking. "Marriage." I asked. His eyes widened. Interesting. Very interesting. Because that reaction told me everything. The perfect couple wasn't so perfect. Not anymore. Maybe it never had been. Marcus stared at his coffee. Then he said something I never expected. "Do you think people can change after they get married?" I nearly smiled. Because that's not a question people ask when things are going well. That's a question people ask after reality arrives. I chose my words carefully. "I think marriage reveals people." His expression darkened. There it was. Recognition. Not disagreement. Recognition. As if a piece of truth had landed somewhere he wasn't ready to examine. We changed the subject. But the conversation stayed with me. A week later, another piece of the puzzle appeared. Then another. Then another. Small things. Tiny things. Yet together they formed a picture. Marcus seemed increasingly isolated. Friends disappeared. Family interactions became rare. Even some of his longtime relationships quietly faded away. And the center of every change seemed to be Vanessa. At first I wondered if I was imagining it. Then Denise called again. "Have you heard about the house?" My stomach tightened. "What house?" Silence. Then, "Oh, not good. Not good at all." "What house, Denise?" "They didn't tell you?" There it was again. That familiar feeling. Being the last person to know. "They bought a house." I stared into space. "When?" 2 months ago." 2 months. 2 months. And nobody told me. Again. What surprised me wasn't the secret. It was the realization that it barely hurt anymore. Instead, I felt detached. Almost peaceful. Like a person finally accepting the weather. Eventually, repeated disappointment stops shocking you. It simply confirms what you already know. Then Denise said something else. Something that made my pulse quicken. "It's beautiful. Good for them." "No, Grace. Listen." I waited. "The property used to belong to your grandfather's company." Silence. Pure silence. Because now I was interested. Very interested. You see, there was something Marcus never discussed with Vanessa's family. Something I never discussed either. Something most people never bothered asking. They assumed they already knew my story. And assumptions are dangerous. Especially when they're built on appearances. My grandfather built one of the largest commercial real estate firms in the region. Not nationally famous. Not flashy. Just powerful. Quietly powerful. The kind of wealth that doesn't need attention. The kind that survives generations. When my parents died, substantial assets eventually passed to me. Not all at once. Through trusts. Investments. Property holdings. Ownership structures. Years of planning. Years of protection. The reason nobody knew? 'Cause I wanted it that way. I spent most of my life avoiding conversations about money. I preferred being judged by character, not numbers. So I became a nurse because I loved it, not because I needed the paycheck. And over time people created their own story about me. Ordinary, middle class, working woman, nothing special. I never corrected them, including Marcus, including Vanessa, including her status-obsessed family, especially them. The irony? The house they had purchased. The house Vanessa proudly showed online. The house her parents constantly bragged about. The house they believed elevated them socially. Was part of a portfolio controlled by a trust that listed me as principal beneficiary. I didn't own the property directly, but I knew exactly where it came from. And suddenly a very interesting possibility emerged. Possibility I wasn't looking for, but one that was rapidly approaching anyway. Because several weeks later, I received a phone call from someone I hadn't spoken to in months. My attorney. And the moment I saw his name appear on my screen, I knew something significant was about to happen. "Grace," he said. "Good afternoon." His voice sounded unusually formal. "What's going on?" A pause. Then, "I think you should come in." Whenever attorneys say that, it usually means one thing. Change. Big change. I arrived the next morning. He greeted me, closed the office door, sat down, and slid a folder across the desk. A thick folder. The kind that carries consequences. I opened it. Started reading. Halfway through the first page I stopped breathing. Then I looked up. "You're serious?" He nodded. Completely. The room suddenly felt very quiet. Because what sat inside that folder wasn't just paperwork. It was leverage. Massive leverage. The kind of leverage that could completely alter the balance of power between me and the people who had spent years looking down on me. The kind of leverage Vanessa would never see coming. The kind of leverage Marcus didn't even know existed. My attorney folded his hands. "How would you like to proceed?" I stared at the documents, thinking, calculating, remembering every insult. Every exclusion, every judgment, every moment they mistook kindness for weakness. And for the first time, I realized something. The power reversal had already begun. They just hadn't noticed yet. Because while Vanessa was busy celebrating a wedding she had hidden from me, while her parents were busy congratulating themselves, while Marcus was busy convincing himself everything was fine, they were all standing on a foundation they didn't actually understand. And that foundation was starting to move. Slowly, quietly, almost invisibly, the same way earthquakes begin. No noise, no warning, just pressure building beneath the surface. Pressure that eventually changes everything. And very soon, they were about to discover exactly who they had been underestimating all these years. I didn't tell anyone about the meeting with my attorney. Not Marcus. Not Denise. Not a single soul. Because some truths work better in silence. And this truth? This one needed time. The folder sat on my dining room table for 3 days. Every time I walked past it, I felt the same thing. Not excitement. Not revenge. Responsibility. Because what sat inside those documents wasn't just money. It was influence. Ownership. Control. Things that reveal people's character almost as quickly as powerlessness does. And before I made a single move, I needed to understand exactly what kind of people I was dealing with. Deep down I already knew. But sometimes the heart takes longer than the mind. Then fate made the decision for me. 2 weeks later Marcus called. His voice sounded strained. "Mom, can we talk?" Something in his tone made me answer immediately. "Of course." There was a long pause. Then he said something I never expected. "We need help." Not "I need help." We. Interesting. Very interesting. Because pride usually disappears when problems arrive. And problems had clearly arrived. I agreed to meet him. The following afternoon, I walked into a private coffee lounge downtown. Marcus was already there. Vanessa sat beside him. The moment I saw her, I knew everything had changed. Gone was the confident smile. Gone was the effortless superiority. Gone was the woman who enjoyed making people feel small. She looked exhausted, nervous, uncomfortable, almost frightened. And for the first time in years, she avoided eye contact. We sat down. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Finally Marcus cleared his throat. "We have a situation." I folded my hands calmly. "What kind of situation?" Vanessa swallowed. The movement was subtle. But I noticed. People who spend years judging others rarely handle pressure well. Especially when they become the ones being evaluated. Marcus exhaled heavily. The house. There it was. The house. The same house Denise had mentioned. The same house connected to my family's holdings. The same house neither of them knew I knew anything about. "What about it?" Marcus exchanged a look with Vanessa. Then he said, "There are complications with the property." Complications. Interesting word. Very corporate. Very safe. I remained silent. People reveal more when you don't rescue them. Eventually Vanessa spoke. "We may lose it." I tilted my head slightly. "May." Marcus looked miserable. Vanessa looked embarrassed. Finally the truth emerged. The financing structure wasn't what they believed. Several assumptions had been made. Several promises had been trusted. Several risks had been ignored. And now the situation was unraveling. As they spoke, something became painfully obvious. Neither of them actually understood what they had purchased. They understood appearances. They understood prestige. They understood what the house represented socially. But they never bothered understanding the foundation beneath it. A fitting metaphor, really. For years they'd done the same thing with people. Judge the surface. Ignore the substance. I listened quietly. Then asked one question. "Have you spoken to the ownership group?" Marcus shook his head. "We've tried." Vanessa finally looked at me. "The representatives won't negotiate." Representatives. I almost smiled. Because technically that was true. They wouldn't negotiate. At least not yet. The room grew quiet. Then Marcus said something that broke my heart. Not because it was cruel. Because it was honest. "Mom, I don't know what to do." For one brief moment I stopped seeing the grown man. I saw my little boy again. The boy who used to bring me broken toys. Broken bicycles. Broken dreams. Certain I'd somehow know how to fix them. And that's what made this so difficult. Because despite everything, I still loved him. Love doesn't disappear simply because someone disappoints you. Sometimes that's what makes disappointment hurt so much. I looked at both of them. Then I asked a question. When exactly were you planning to tell me about the wedding? Silence. Immediate silence. Vanessa looked away. Marcus closed his eyes. Neither answered. Because there was no good answer. Only the truth. And the truth was ugly. Eventually Marcus whispered. We weren't. There it was. No excuses. No spin. No clever explanation. Just truth. Painful truth. And somehow hearing it felt better than years of lies. I nodded slowly. Thank you for being honest. Vanessa looked shocked. As if honesty wasn't what she expected to be punished for. Then she surprised me. For the first time ever. I was wrong. The words barely escaped her mouth. Almost reluctant. Almost painful. But they were real. I thought. She stopped. Tried again. I thought you judged me. I blinked. That wasn't the answer I expected. Vanessa stared at the table. I thought you looked down on me. The irony nearly took my breath away. For years I believed she saw me as beneath her. Meanwhile she had spent years assuming I disapproved of her. Two insecure people. One silent. One defensive. And all that insecurity had transformed into cruelty. But insecurity explains behavior. Doesn't excuse it. Is that why you excluded me? I asked quietly. Tears appeared in her eyes. Actual tears. Not dramatic tears. Embarrassed tears. The kind people cry when they finally see themselves clearly. I kept thinking Marcus would choose you over me. I sat back. And suddenly the entire puzzle snapped together. Every insult. Every comment. Every exclusion. Every competition that only one person knew existed. She was never competing against me. She was competing against the idea of me. The relationship between a mother and son she didn't understand. The security she never experienced herself. The love she couldn't control. And because she couldn't control it, she tried to diminish it. The realization didn't erase the damage, but it changed the shape of it. Then I asked the question that mattered. Do you love him? Vanessa answered instantly. Yes. No hesitation. No performance. Just truth. Then I turned toward Marcus. Do you love her? Yes. Another immediate answer. I nodded. Good. Because what happened next would be easier if that part was real. I reached into my purse, removed a business card, and slid it across the table. Vanessa looked down, then froze. Marcus froze too. The color drained from both their faces. I watched realization spread slowly, like sunrise. Slow, then sudden. The law firm, the trust, the ownership structure, the names, the connections, all the pieces they never knew existed. Marcus stared at me. What is this? I smiled gently. The ownership group. Silence. Absolute silence. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then Vanessa whispered. No. I nodded. Yes. Her hand covered her mouth. Marcus looked physically ill. The room seemed to tilt around them. For years they thought they knew exactly who I was. For years they built an entire narrative around me. Ordinary. Unimportant. Socially insignificant. Someone to tolerate. Someone to manage. Someone whose feelings could be ignored. And now that illusion was collapsing. Not because I announced my wealth. Not because I bragged. Not because I demanded respect. Because reality had finally arrived. The quietest truths are often the most devastating. Marcus looked at me with wide eyes. Mom. I shook my head. No. Tears filled his eyes. And suddenly I saw shame. Real shame. The kind that arrives when someone realizes they didn't misunderstand a situation. They misunderstood a person. For years. I never wanted this, he said. I know. I didn't know. I know. Vanessa looked completely shattered. You own it. Not directly. Her breathing quickened. But you could help. I studied her carefully. Then asked the most important question of the entire story. Why should I? Silence. Long silence. Neither spoke. Neither rushed to answer. Because some questions deserve honesty. Eventually Vanessa lowered her head. You shouldn't. The room went still. That answer surprised even Marcus. She continued, I treated you horribly. A tear slid down her cheek. You were kind to me. Another tear. And I kept trying to make you feel small. She laughed bitterly. Because I was afraid. Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. The truth was finally doing what years of conflict couldn't. Cleaning the wound. Painfully. But completely. Then she whispered, I'm sorry. Not polished. Not strategic. Not performative. Just sorry. And somehow that mattered. A lot. I looked at Marcus. Then Vanessa. Then the card. Then the years behind us. And I made a decision. Not because they deserved it. Because I deserved peace. There's a difference. A huge difference. People often confuse forgiveness with surrender. They're not the same thing. Forgiveness isn't permission. It's freedom. Freedom from carrying bitterness longer than necessary. I leaned forward. There will be conditions. Both nodded immediately. Good. Very good. Because consequences matter. Over the next hour we talked. Really talked. For the first time. No games. No status. No performance. Just truth. Uncomfortable truth. The best kind. Months passed. Slowly things changed. Not overnight. Real healing never happens overnight. Marcus began showing up again. Phone calls returned. Visits returned. Conversations returned. Trust took longer. Much longer. Trust is built in drops and lost in buckets. But progress happened. Little by little. And Vanessa? The change in her surprised me most. One afternoon she visited alone. No Marcus. Just her. We sat on my porch drinking iced tea. The same porch she'd spent years avoiding. After a while she said something I'll never forget. You know what bothered me most? I raised an eyebrow. What? She laughed softly. You never tried to impress anybody. I smiled. No. She nodded. My whole family spends their lives trying to look important. A long pause. Then, you never needed to. That was the day she finally understood the difference between wealth and worth. One can be displayed. The other must be lived. A year later we stood together at another celebration. This time there were no secrets. No exclusions. No hidden invitations. No power games. Just family. Real family. Messy. Imperfect. Growing. Healing. At one point Vanessa walked over and handed me something. A framed photograph. I looked down. It was a picture from that day. The day Marcus and Vanessa had renewed their vows. Publicly. Properly. With everyone present. Including me. Across the bottom was a handwritten note. Simple. Only 4 words. The 4 words I had waited years to hear. Thank you for staying. I stared at them for a long time. Then smiled. Because she finally understood. Real class isn't about money. Real class isn't about status. Real class isn't about exclusive invitations or expensive addresses. Real class is how you treat people when you think they have nothing to offer you. That's the test. Always. And eventually life gives everyone that test. Some pass. Some fail. Some get a second chance. And if they're lucky enough, they learn from it. As for me, I stopped chasing acceptance. Stopped trying to earn places where I should have been welcomed. Stopped confusing access with love. And in doing so, I found something far more valuable. Peace. The kind of peace that doesn't depend on anyone else's approval. The kind of peace nobody can take away. The kind of peace that comes from knowing exactly who you are. And never needing to prove it. Ever again. The funny thing is, people often ask me whether I regret helping them. I don't. Because helping them wasn't for them. It was for me. Bitterness is a heavy burden. And I was tired of carrying it. So I set it down. And I walked forward. Lighter. Wiser. Free. And that's where this story ends. But I'd love to know what you think. If you were in my position, would you have helped Marcus and Vanessa after everything that happened? Or would you have walked away? Let me know in the comments. And tell me where you're watching from. I read as many comments as I can. And I genuinely love hearing your perspectives. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe and join us for more unforgettable stories about dignity, family, respect, second chances, and the quiet power of knowing your worth. Until next time, take care of yourselves. And never let anyone make you forget your value.